Hello everyone, Giltar here with a response to Cimbolic's video titled "And a Side Order of Koko, Please," which in turn is a video response to Life in Heaven Forever's video called "Taking Another Life in Any Form is Wrong, Period." I'll be doing my own video response here because I actually typed a whole bunch of responses, several messages in the comment section of Cimbolic's video, and I figured if I was going to type that much, I might as well make a video response as well. So for the most part, I'll be reading from my responses here, so here we go. Is there an insinuation that if one eats a hamburger that one supports the cruel practices employed by modern large-scale industrialized farming operations? As someone who was born and raised in a small town that was and still is populated by many farmers who have small-scale farms and use traditional farming methods, I know of a way to get our food sources without the sort of suffering and cruelty and torture that large-scale farming operations use. I know it may sound strange to people who haven't lived as a farmer or who doesn't know farmers on a personal level, but the farmers that I knew treated the animals they raised for food with a sense of honor and respect. Despite the fact that these animals were meant to die at some point for our sustenance, the farmers saw what they did as something that was a responsibility to their communities, those who basically bought the food that these farmers raised and created and produced. They always showed gratitude towards the animals that were destined to die for our survival. Not all sources of meat come from animals that live a tortured existence, experienced in industrialized farming operations. Now, as far as the idea of being immoral or wrong for humans to eat the flesh of another animal, what I would have to ask those people that believe that is, should we hold other animals to the same moral standard? I mean, I would ask, isn't this the norm on our planet for animals to consume other animals for sustenance? Is the argument of eating animals about the concept of eating an animal purely, or the concept of eating an animal that was farmed rather than hunted? Because I do see a lot of discussions involving arguments against meat eating will always bring in the industrialized farming practices, but no one ever mentions the traditional farming methods that are far better, and I would say a method for animals to live a decently normal life before being killed for food. That's a much better way to live than being in an industrialized farm. And some people would argue, being on a farm, period, they're being enslaved and whatnot. That's true. They're not there out of choice, but at the same time, would these people also say it's wrong to hunt animals? And if so, is it wrong for animals to hunt animals? I guess that's what I'm getting at, is like, why should humans be so much different than other animals? That's the thing. If we want to treat animals as somewhat equals, that they are like us in value and worth and quality, shouldn't the opposite also be in effect, that if an animal hunts another animal, what's wrong for a human to do the same thing? That's what I would ask. Now, with respect to alternative protein sources, Cimbolic did mention that we have the ability to choose non-meat sources of protein. But the thing is that I would ask, how affordable is it? How accessible and available are they? And how many people really know about it? Because, like, for example, I don't know much about vegetable protein aside from the more common sources of vegetable protein come in the form of the combination of two different types of vegetable protein in order to create a complete protein that our human bodies can use properly. I mean, there are some exceptions, such as spirulina and chlorella, which are two forms of complete protein sources from plant life. And I only know about them because I take chlorella and spirulina into my regular diet. I actually eat those two things. Now, with that being said, ultimately that's the thing, is that a lot of anti-animal eaters will come at the angle of the argument by sort of attacking the idea of eating animals, but they don't come out and start to simply educate people to say, instead of start pointing fingers and say it's wrong to eat animal flesh. I would say they could convince more people or educate more people by simply trying to inform them of, well, instead of eating animal meat, here's what you can do instead, and start off from that angle and take a less offensive approach to trying to discuss this topic. And that's the thing I find about the whole vegetable protein thing, is that I don't know anything about it, and if I want to find out about it, it's not that easy to get that information, because if I ask a vegetarian, often they'll tell me about it, but then it inevitably winds up being a discussion about the evils of killing an animal, and that's not what I'm there for. I don't want to be sort of lectured that I'm an evil person because I killed an animal to eat it. Now, it's likely obvious at this point that I'm someone who doesn't object to the consumption of animal flesh. I view all forms of life as important. I don't draw the line at simply animal life. All living organisms that I'm aware of serve important roles in our environment on this planet. And I find it interesting that people will object to the ending the life of an animal for sustenance, but not object to the ending of plant life for the same purpose. I mean, is the drawing the line at animal life as a boundary we shouldn't cross out of the concept of not wishing to do harm or incur suffering on life forms that can feel? I mean, is there perhaps an element of recognition in those things that we can anthropomorphize? And basically, do we hesitate to eat things that we see a resemblance in? Is that partly why we humans have less hesitation when considering the taking of plant life for food, since plants don't exhibit behavior that we view as possibly human or humanistic? As an omnivore, I do take into consideration of taking of all life involved in my food sources. I view it partly as being a participant in a natural order. As I mentioned before, other animals consume other life forms as well. And I'm grateful for those who have died in order to feed my body. It's something I learned from the farmers I grew up with. It's something I learned from my father, who was a fisherman in his youth. These people, they worked with the earth and the ocean. They became in tune with the seasons and became students of the cycles of nature. They understood that in order to sustain themselves and their environment, they gave back as much as they took. They were not simply consumers. They worked with nature, as odd as it sounds to some people. Now, those who argue against the consumption of animals often insinuate that eating the flesh of animals comes from a perspective of ignorance, that people don't understand that or don't think about the fact that they're eating something that was once living, or they're apathetic to the death of animals. I, for one, am quite aware of what I've done and continue to do, but I view it again as being a participant in a natural or a naturalistic order. And ultimately, what concerns me the most is how an animal lived before it was killed for my food. I don't view the taking of a life to be necessarily immoral or wrong. It's the intent behind the act and the methods used in that act that concern me. To be honest, I do view the taking of a plant's life over an animal's life as the same thing. They're both still involving the taking of a life. It's not about the capacity to feel or be aware. It was just simply the fact that if something was killed to help me live, I consider that. And I don't care if it's plant or animal, they're both living things. And I do take that very seriously. And I still do eat meat and vegetables, while doing the best I can to make informed choices, buying to the best of my ability from sources that do not involve cruel practices in the farming of their food products. However, I won't lie and say that I've been able to make purely good choices. I've made compromises from time to time, but I'm doing the best I can in order to try to keep a balanced diet. I mean, that's as honest as I can be about this topic. And I think ultimately, the way I view things is that I'm leading a balanced life. I'm consuming life, period. Animal, plant, and otherwise. I mean, when I wash my hands, I'm killing bacteria that's on the surface of my skin. And that's for survival, just like I need to eat to survive. And I don't look at washing my hands as murder of bacteria. I'm looking at it as avoiding sickness and death. I don't do it out of malice or out of ignorance. I'm quite aware of what I'm doing. I don't always think about it, but I am aware of what is being done. And I think it's really interesting to take a stance of either pro-animal consumption or anti-animal consumption with a little middle ground. The loudest voices are often the most extreme. And so I'm hoping that my video here, my response, can offer a slightly different perspective for consideration. So I want to thank both Cimbolic and Life in Heaven Forever for putting up a very interesting topic for discussion. There have been some other responses from people like Conference Report, and it's very interesting. So I hope you guys enjoyed my video here and maybe got something out of it. I thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.